on with our outstanding guest speaker series, today the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab is proud to present Joy Oria. Joy has been a librarian at the Clayton Library Center for Genealogical Research in Houston, Texas since 2015. She received a BA in music from the Moore School of Music at the University of Houston and has worked as a park ranger and zookeeper. She completed the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy course Advanced Hispanic Research in 2020. And she has presented at the Genealogical Society of Hispanic America Conference and will present at the upcoming We Are Cousins Conference. She is currently transcribing padrones for the Sahuayo area of Michoacan, Mexico. I hope I pronounced that right.
You got it.
Today's presentation is titled Researching Mexican Ancestry, Discover the Rich Records of Mexican Genealogy, Get started in researching Mexican ancestors and examine records commonly found in Mexican genealogical research. Learn research strategies and translation tips, as well as how to identify a town of origin and navigate online databases. So without further ado, I would like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Joy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. It's really cool being able to talk to people in Nevada. Researching Mexican ancestry is really a wonderful experience because there's centuries of very accessible records to explore. And as family history researchers, we really benefit from a very long history of excellent record keeping on behalf of the Catholic Church, the Spanish colonial government, and the Mexican government. So my hope is that wherever you are in your research, whether you're just starting out or if you've been at it for a while, that you'll learn some new things today that will help you out or help you help other people. So let's get started. So the topics that we're going to be covering are research strategies. We'll cover some tips to keep in mind when researching Mexican ancestors. We'll talk about identifying the place of origin, because before we can research in another country, we need to know what town our ancestor came from. And that's true whether you're researching in Mexico or Germany or Ireland or anywhere. Unfortunately, knowing the country or the state usually isn't enough. You really need a town name, whether it's where your ancestor was born or where they were married or baptized children. And then we'll look at the records. The Catholic Church provides us with many records, particularly baptisms and marriages, as well as burials, confirmations, and censuses. And then also we're going to take a look at the civil registration records created by the Mexican government for births, marriages, and deaths. And we'll also look again at censuses. So those are the major record groups that we'll be covering. And then translation tips. Whether you're fluent in Spanish or not, there's going to be times going through these historical documents where something is strange or unusual and Google Translate does not have a suggestion. So we'll talk about some resources and solutions for those times. And then online research. We'll talk about how to most effectively use family search and ancestry, which of course the two behemoths of online genealogy research. Okay, my first research strategy, decipher handwriting by comparing multiple records and remembering formats. Well, pretty much all the records we're going to look at are going to follow very similar formats. You'll see the same recurring phrases like in baptism records and marriage records, like Casé y velé en facie ecclesia a. I marry and bless in front of the church, which will be followed by the names of the groom and the bride. So you'll quickly learn how to identify where the key information is within a document. Of course, we want to read the whole document, but if you're struggling with the handwriting or the language, at least you'll be able to identify where those important information is, like names and dates and so forth. When it comes to handwriting, it does pay off to get familiar with that record keeper's handwriting. Ideally, when we find a record about our ancestor, we want to be able to understand it right away. But if the handwriting's challenging, what we might have to do is take a look at the records around it and get a feel for how this person writes their R's and how they write their S's. And maybe there's some words in these other records that are clearer and easier to make out. So it does definitely pay off to get a sense of that person's handwriting. One of the best tools that I've come across for learning about handwritten genealogical records is called the BYU script. And we'll get into that further when I talk about translation tips. Okay, next up, ethnicity labels. And Sue mentioned this earlier, may have been based on physical appearance or social status. So Spanish colonial records often indicated someone's ethnicity, but these designations were, you could say, somewhat arbitrary. probably based more on skin color or living conditions rather than an accurate racial makeup. You can sometimes even see someone's racial status evolving. On a baptism record, they could be called mestizo by the time they get married. If they've had a rise in fortunes, perhaps they'll be labeled Espanol. Now, these ethnicity labels matter to us as researchers because sometimes books were kept by race. So you might have one book that's for the marriages of Españoles, the Spanish, and another completely separate book for the marriages of Indios, indigenous people, or Indians. Okay, names usually don't change with marriage. If two surnames are listed, the first is the father's and the second the mother's. So historically, and I'm not talking about modern day, women did not change their names upon marrying. Typically the name you were born with would be the name that you died with. So a woman who is baptized, Marcela Mendoza, would be Marcela Mendoza in all future records. Now there are exceptions. I'm not saying nobody never changed their surname. You might want to change your surname to match that of a rich relative who's looking at you as an heir. Or I've seen this a couple of times when the father in a family passes away, the family started to use the mother's surname. Be alert for descriptors following names. There are many possible descriptive words that could follow a name, and they could refer to a person's ethnic background, Espanol, mestizo, Indio, Spanish, mixed race, Indian, or to a person's marital status. Casado, married, soltero, bachelor, doncella, maiden, viudo, widow. You might even see difunto or vivo to describe if a person is deceased or alive. Marriage records will typically name parents and say if they're alive or deceased. So the point is, just pay close attention to words that are following a name because they could be giving you very important information. When I started doing genealogy, I had my Ancestry.com trial subscription, and I would type names in the search boxes on the homepage. And that worked pretty well for my mom's side of the family. They were farmers in Illinois. But when I got to my father's side of the family, he's deceased. I don't have any family members that I can ask about his side of the family. So I was kind of on my own there, and I had some information about my grandmother. I knew her name, when she was born, and her parents' names, but I just didn't know what town name to put in. Well, I tried searching with that criteria, and of course I got a lot of results, over 400,000 results. I just didn't know where. She passed away before I was born. My father didn't talk about his life before I knew him, and he never talked about his mother's. I don't know why. But the point of this very long story is you've got to have a town name. Most often you're going to find this in records created in the United States. So vital records, church records, naturalization records, military, border crossing, passenger list, etc. Let's take a look at a few of them. These naturalization papers were pretty easy to find for my dad. They're in yellow. It gives his birth date, October 10th, 1942, in Guadalajara. So naturalization papers, typically you'll be able to find a birthplace. Marriage record. It's so important to look at what you have at home already. And I didn't really catch on that I had this until I had gone through old papers a couple of times. But I'm glad that I have it. My father wrote to the church when I was a kid, and he got this copy of his parents' marriage. And they were married in La Palma, Michoacan. So it's not telling me their birthplaces per se. I could look for more information about their marriage. I could look for the marriage investigation records. That's a possibility. Another possibility, a lot of times couples married in a bride's hometown. In this case is actually the groom's hometown, where I found his baptism records. Death certificates can also sometimes give birthplace. So the one on the right is for my grandmother, and it just says that she was born in Mexico, so I don't get that town name. The information on death certificates, of course, is provided by someone, hopefully close to the deceased, like a spouse or child. but sometimes that's not possible. It could be a son-in-law. It could be even a neighbor. So we might not get the information we're hoping to see. So my grandmother's death certificate, I did not get her birthplace. The informant was actually her second husband. So either he didn't know it or he said it, but the person filling in the information for him on the death certificate, when they heard Cojumatlan, they might have just decided to write Mexico. I don't know. But the death certificate on the left for an ancestor on my mom's side of the family does give a place of origin. So it's the name of the little town in Germany that she came from. It also gives me her father's name, and I was able to find her birth record in Germany and continue tracing the family line there. Border crossing records are wonderful records. This is a record for my step-grandfather, and it's saying his birthplace is Monclova, Coahuila, Mexico. And it also gives me the name of his mother. There below, it says Anastasia Perez, viuda of Oria. So she's the widow of Oria. So her husband is deceased at the time of this record. Now, initially, when I learned about border crossing records, I wasn't really that interested in them, and I didn't think I would find family members in them, just because the family story was when they came to this country, they didn't fill out any paperwork. But of course, there's actually a lot of back and forth movement across the border, and it's worth taking a look just in case your ancestors in there. And it's not just for people who were born in Mexico. Many people from around the world came into Mexico and entered the US crossing the Mexican border. Okay, let me go back a second. So there are other records you can also find birthplaces in, again, usually created in the United States. If you tried every record you can think of and you're still not finding that birthplace, you could try researching extended family members or people who associated with your ancestor in the hopes that perhaps they're from the same area. Possibility. Well, once you've identified a place of origin, go ahead and take some time to learn a little bit about it. It'll help you to know where it's located and its jurisdictions and surrounding communities and so forth. One of my favorite sources is this geographical dictionary that's written by Antonio Garcia Cubas. And this was a 5-volume set that was published in the 1890s. It's been digitized, and you can find it on multiple websites. And here I'm looking up the town of Cojumatlan, where my grandmother was born. So it's telling me that it's part of the municipality of Sahuayo. And indeed, I have found records for people who lived in Cojumatlan within Sahuayo's records. So that's where it really helps to know the jurisdictions. The dictionary entry goes on to tell me where it's located. It's on the edge of Lake Chapala with a backdrop of a picturesque mountain covered with fruit trees. Sounds nice. It goes on to even tell what crops were grown there. Sugarcane, melons, watermelons, and all types of vegetables. Corn, bean, and chickpea. And then also I'm finding out that there's a hacienda of the same name nearby. Now, if you're really interested in learning about the geography of your ancestor, this might be a little bit more advanced, are these geographical guides written by Peter Gerhard. So he published 3 of them. The first one, Guide to the Historical Geography of New Spain, is kind of like the central Mexico region. The north frontier of New Spain, of course, northern Mexico, and also the southern what's now the United States. And then the southeast frontier of New Spain is going to be the Yucatan Peninsula. And he just gives really good detailed information. So if that's something you're interested in, try to find his books. They're usually at academic libraries. So if it's not close to you, you could contact the library and ask them to send you the entry for your location. All right, let's start talking about the records. Well, with Spain's colonization of the Americas came the Catholic Church. Catholicism was the only religion. Now, could you practice another religion like Judaism? Yes, you could, but watch out for the Inquisition. There was a lot of pressure to participate in the church, so odds are you will find ancestors in Catholic Church records. Church records in Mexico began around the mid-1500s. Percentages of them have been lost to time, whether it's war or damage or so forth, but there's a lot of records still available to us. And the church was concerned about the sacraments. So they wanted to know when a person was baptized, not necessarily when they were born. Just keep that in mind when you're looking at dates. We're also going to find confirmation records, marriage records, burial records, and church censuses. There are more church records as well. I'm just not going to be getting into them today. But the main ones are going to be baptisms and marriages, and you can find some of the others as well. And the other major records that we're going to look at were created by the Mexican government called civil registration records. And this is something that began in 1859. And they kept track of births, marriages, and deaths. And when this began, people were suspicious of it. So it did take a while for compliance to kick in. So if you have an ancestor that was born in 1860, you might not find a civil registration birth record. Now, if you have ancestor events occurring after civil registration begins, that's a bonus for you because you can look for the civil registration record and the church record, right? If you have ancestors who married in 1880, you should be able, hopefully, to find a church record and a civil registration record and compare them because they could possibly hold different information or information that's you won't find in the other one. The Mexican government also took censuses, and we're going to take a look at one a little bit later. Let's get into baptism records. Well, this baptism record is pretty easy to read, other than some slight damage to the paper. It's a printed form. It's bound in a book that the priest would fill out. So we have some very standard phrases. We have the place in Cojumatlan. We have the date, the 3rd of November, 1914. The name of the priest, Heliodoro Moreno. And he is baptizing a baby girl, una infanta, who was born 30 days ago in Callejon, which was a little village about 3 miles from Cojumatlan. It did not have a church, so they had to bring the baby to Cojumatlan to be baptized. It says, I give her the name Maria, and she is the legitimate daughter, meaning her parents were married in the church, of Abraham Torres and Julia Manzo. Sometimes baptism records will include the names of grandparents, but not in this example. And then lastly, we have the names of the godparents, or padrinos. Keep in mind that godparents are sometimes relatives, so definitely worth noting. Here's a baptism record that's handwritten of Maria's father, but it's in the same format. So we can figure this out. It's telling us the place, Cojumatlan, telling us the date, 17th of March, 1879, name of the priest, and he is baptizing a baby boy who's 4 days old and was born in the ranch of Ixcuintla. So again, it was nearby, but it didn't have a church, so they came into Cojumatlan. Gives us the name, his name, Jose Abraham de Jesus. He is the legitimate son of Luis Torres and Maria Marcela Mendoza, and the names of the godparents. Now this record has a couple of notations in the margin. At the top, you can see his name, Jose Abraham de Jesus, where he's from, the Ixcuintla. And then there's a vertical note that says he was married, where did I write the date? He married Julia Manzo on January 31st, 1912. So you may or you may not see notes like this on baptism records. It just kind of depends on the parish priest and that they felt like writing this note. Well, one thing I noticed going through the baptism records for this town is that I would see clusters of a name. So in the example on the left, we have 2 different baby girls who are being baptized, totally different parents. They're both being baptized Maria Gregoria on March 12th. St. Gregory's feast day used to be March 12th until it was later moved. So they're being named Gregoria on St. Gregory's feast day. You know where I'm going with this. Example on the right, we have a baby boy being baptized Jose Valentin on February 16th, and he's 3 days old, meaning he was born on February 14th. So one way for you to possibly find out your ancestor's birthday is to take their name and research saints' feast days. Either the day they were born or the day they were baptized. Just one possibility. And here's the civil registration birth record. It looks a little intimidating. It's got a lot of handwriting. It's in cursive, but you know they have very standard formats. They just start off with the record number. It's record 116. Gives you the place and the date. So we're in Cojumatlan again. It's the 9th of August, 1915 at 8 a.m. in the morning. And I love how they give the time. And then it names the person who appeared at the civil registry to announce the birth of a child. So the date that's at the beginning of this record is not the birth date, it's the date the record was created. We have here Isabel Manriquez. She's a resident of the Rancho Rincon de Maria. And she's telling the judge there that a baby boy was born 4 days ago at 3 p.m. at home, who is named Jose Manriquez, and he is her natural son. So that means the baby boy's parents have not married by civil registration. They were, however, married in a church ceremony, but the church and the government don't recognize each other's marriages. So to civil registration, his parents are unmarried, but they got married in the church. The church isn't going to recognize civil registration marriage. Just keep that in mind when you see phrases like hijo legítimo and hijo natural. So at first glance, a confirmation record might not look very exciting, but you can confirm the relationships between children and their parents. You have them in a specific place at a specific time. You can note the name of the godparent, see if that's possibly a relative. You can also find more children in a given family, such as the siblings of your direct ancestor. In this confirmation record, I found 2 brothers and their father getting confirmed. Well, confirmations were only performed by the bishop, so how often these records appear depends on how often the bishop came to town. In smaller towns, the bishop probably didn't come too often, and that's why you would see people of many different ages getting confirmed at the same time. Now, confirmation records usually are not indexed, so you'll more likely than not find them by browsing through a town's church records, probably nestled amongst the baptism records. And let me show you the people I found. I found Maximiano and Abraham were brothers, right? They had the same parents, Luis Torres and Marcelina Mendoza. Earlier, we saw Abraham's baptism record, and his mother was Marcela Mendoza. Here we see she also goes by Marcelina. So it's nice to know those name variations. And then their father, Luis Torres, is also getting confirmed, and it has his parents listed, Dolores Torres and Jesus Santiago. And I know this is actually the correct Luis from his marriage record, which gave the names of his parents. So that's how I'm able to confirm his confirmation. So I really enjoy confirmation records when I can find them. I thought it was pretty cool to be able to find 3 generations of family in this one record. Well, like baptisms, marriage records have a very standard format. You get the place and the date, the priest's name, and then the phrase you especially want to look for, Casé y velé, en face ecclesia a. So I married and I blessed in front of the church, and then the names of the groom and the bride, Abraham Torres and Julia Manzo. And the witnesses. And then that's it. It's kind of skimpy for a genealogical record, right? It seems kind of paltry. But there was an investigation before they could get married called Información Matrimonial. Let's take a look at it. So before a marriage can take place, the church wants to investigate if both parties are cleared to get married. Are they closely related? If they are, they might need a dispensation. Has either party been married or engaged before? What happened to the previous spouse? Has either party made a commitment to the church, such as joining the priesthood? So these records are going to give you much more information than the marriage record itself, and typically they were recorded in separate books. So keep that in mind when looking for them. So this marriage investigation had a lovely cover sheet, so I included an image of it. And then there were several pages following it, so I just included one little snippet there. You're going to find the names of the parents, whether they're deceased or alive, where the bride and groom were born, their ages, where they're living now, and how long they've lived there. And it continues on. Witnesses will give testimony to knowing the bride and groom, and the priest will record the readings of the amonestaciones, or banns, which were done on 3 consecutive holy days, usually Sundays. So the banns allowed time for members of the church to raise any claims of impediments to the marriage. Marriage dispensations often were for consanguinity, which is sharing a common ancestor. So a couple wanting to get married in the Catholic Church who were related within the 4th degree of consanguinity, such as having a common great-great-grandparent, needed a marriage dispensation. And these records would often include a family tree showing the connection between the bride and groom. So I was leafing through the marriage investigations, saw this family tree, and it popped out to me because of the surname Buenrostro, which is a surname that I'm researching. So the potential bride and groom are at the bottom. We see Ramon and Maria Avalos. So those are the two that want to get married. And this little diagram, if you will, is showing us their common ancestor. So they are under genealogy tree, Arbol Genealogía. We see a name. That's their common ancestor, Francisco Salvador Buenrostro y esposa. So it does not name his wife. But Francisco Salvador had a daughter, Felipa, and a son, Cayetano. They had children, Santiago and Maria Guadalupe, who were first cousins. Then they had children, Ramon and Juliana, who were second cousins. Juliana had a daughter, Maria Avalos, and she is Ramon's second cousin once removed. Pretty sure I'm right about that. Okay. Well, if a marriage occurs once civil registration has started, then additionally look for that record. Again, the key year is 1859. Just remember it did take a little while for compliance to kick in. Unlike the church marriage record, for example, this record gives me the ages of Julia's parents. So that's great information. I'm glad I found it. All right, burial records can really vary widely on how much information they provide. It can be very basic, or you might get some good stuff. This one has some good stuff. We have the deceased's name, Luis Torres. His age, he's 40. Where he died, Rancho de Rincón de María. The cause of his death, wounds. And his marital status, he's a widower. Keep in mind that the date that's given here, May 30th, 1899, is the date of his burial, not necessarily his death date, although I imagine he probably died very close to that date. And then there's the civil registration death record. Same date, same place, same name. His age, he's 5 years older, but I'm not too surprised at inconsistency in ages with these older records, but I'm going to keep that in mind. His residency, Rincón de María. This one gives me his parents' names, Jose Dolores Torres and Maria Jesus Santiago. They're both alive. And it tells me Luis is originally from a rancho called Calera. Let's see, and it gives his deceased wife's name, Marcela Mendoza. So both church records and civil registration records are going to give you a wealth of information. So if both are available, of course, try to find both and compare. The only countrywide federal census available to us from Mexico is the 1930 census. Other censuses were taken, but this is the only one that we have to work with at this time. Now, some localities, including the federal district, are missing. But if you have family members in Mexico in 1930, look for them in this census. It's available on Ancestry and Family Search. The format's pretty similar to U.S. federal censuses, such as the questions it asks in the format. One thing it does not give you is the relationship between people in the household. So you just want to be careful about making assumptions about relationships. In this case, I do know it's dad and mom and their kids, and it's giving you their ages, gender, what else, marital status, and so forth. Here's a little census trick, if you haven't heard it already. Sometimes you can estimate when the parents were married by subtracting the age of the oldest child. In this case, it's Luis Torres. He's 18 years old. Subtract that from the mother's age. She's 34 minus 18. She was 16 when she had Luis, and that is indeed when she was married. And then I've got a family photo that I think was taken around 1930. The 1930 census, my grandmother was 16. And in the photograph, she's the woman in the dark dress on the left with her hand on her hip. So I think she looks around 16. Then the only other person I know in this photo is her mother, who's on the far right. But I imagine the people in the middle are probably her dad and a couple of brothers. Okay, you can also find church censuses, often called padrones. Sometimes they're mixed in with other church records, and unfortunately, they're usually not indexed. A lot of them are from Spain's colonial rule, so you'll see them more from like the late 1600s, 1700s, early 1800s. And they're very localized censuses. They're listing members of that parish. And their focus is members of the parish who have confessed and taken communion during the Easter season. It's possible you might not see young children on these censuses because they weren't able to participate in the church with those sacraments. Sometimes children are listed, but they're just notated as children. There's a lot of variety in these censuses, a lot of variety. You might just get a list of names for that parish, or the census taker might break them down into households like this census did. You might get somebody's marital status, ethnicity, maybe even their occupation or age. It really does vary quite a bit. But in this example from 1746, we can see they broke it down by household. Usually the first family or two or a few were families of social importance, maybe local leaders, the priests, or I don't know, wealthy people. So this first household is the Casa del Gobernador. We see there's Luis Contreras and his wife, Francisca Mónica, su mujer. That's an old-fashioned expression for his wife. And then there's two women also in the household. It does not tell us if those are their daughters. You know, it's tempting to make that assumption, but we can't really know that without finding more records. And the last woman listed, Maria Augustina, it says para la doctrina. That indicates to me she's probably learned confession, but maybe is not doing communion yet. She's probably between 10 and 13 and still learning the church doctrine. So you can find transcriptions of padrones in books or Hispanic genealogy periodicals and even some blogs. Finding the images of the original padrones online can be a bit of a hunt. One resource, if you're interested in that, is to use this book by Lyman Platt, Census Records for Latin America and the Hispanic United States. It's pretty easy to use. You go to your country. So I went to Mexico, then I went to Michoacan, and then you look for a town you're interested in. And if you don't see that town, look for the nearest large town. So I looked for Cojumatlan. I only saw one census listed. Then I looked at Sahuayo, which had several listed. And then I researched Sahuayo's censuses, and I found entries for Cojumatlan within those records. So what you do, you find the town you want, go to the column on the far right, and you'll see these long numbers, so like 6-digit numbers. That's the microfilm number. So you can copy that number, go into familysearch.org catalog, enter that in the microfilm field, and that's how you can pull up that census. And I think I've got some images here. Whoops. Well, maybe I don't. Okay. If you're interested in padrones, they're kind of a hobby of mine, so you can email me with questions if you want to get into that. Okay, there are plenty of other records. Some of them notarial records called protocolos. These are records that were recorded and verified by a notary. So public notaries in Latin America record a much greater variety of legal documents, like wills, guardianship records, dowry records, etc. The thing is very few Mexican notarial records have been microfilmed, so they're a little bit more difficult for researchers to access. You're typically going to find them in archives, but the catch is, which archive? Is it a local archive, a state archive, or even a national archive? And that's, part of the challenge is finding which archive the notary's papers went to. And this is similarly true for military records. Few have been microfilmed, and the records are typically in archives. Could be in Mexico, or could even be in Spain if from the colonial era. Some archives do provide digital images of their material online, such as the Bear Archives and Nacogdoches Archives. I'm more familiar with Texas research, so that's how I know about those. The Fondo Colonial, which represents the province of Nueva Vizcaya, which is now Chihuahua, Durango, Sonora, Sinaloa, and part of Coahuila. I have found Hispanic genealogy periodicals to be very helpful to my research, and also for learning. So if you're able to access any, whether it's your local library or through a fellow researcher, take a look at them. Even if they've been published decades ago, the information in them is still going to be valid. Unless it's an article about a computer software program, that might not be valid. But they provide things like transcriptions. Maybe somebody took a trip to an archive and they transcribed these old records that you can't find online. Or you can find family histories or how-to articles. If you get a chance to check them out, I encourage it. All right, translation tips. Just remember, most documents are following a specific format. If you get to know these, your research is going to be a lot easier. And there's a couple of books by George and Peggy Rice-Camp, Finding Your Mexican Ancestors, A Beginner's Guide, and Tracing Your Hispanic Heritage. They give a lot of good information about formats. And then also the BYU script tutorial provides examples of formats. We'll get to that in a second. Spelling will be strange and inconsistent. You can almost expect spelling to be inconsistent. Within a record, I'll see the same surname spelled different ways. It's just not standardized the way we expect it to be today. And sometimes spellings were a lot different than you would see it today. For example, the word indio, we spell it today starting with the letter I. It was often spelled starting with a Y in the past. Or the name Ventura, you could see it starting with a B or starting with a V. So one little trick you can do if you see a word, you're like, what is this? Is just try saying it out loud, and sometimes the sounds will help you recognize the word. Watch out for abbreviations. If you had to write everything out by hand, you'd probably use abbreviations too. Names, words, and even whole phrases could be abbreviated. One of the tools to figure them out, I'm going to get to in a second, and I bet you can guess what it is. It's the BYU script tutorial. Crowdsourcing challenging sections. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, we just can't make out part of a record. And this is where I found asking others to be helpful, whether it's fellow researchers, librarians, or Facebook groups. But I do just want to say, as wonderful as Facebook groups have been, you want to verify what someone tells you, of course, beyond not just Facebook, but I've seen some very strange claims made on Facebook that I know are not true, and it makes me cringe a little bit that this wrong information is being spread out to gullible genealogists. But it's just like with anything, you want to verify your information. And then here it is, the famous BYU script tutorial I keep talking about. This is one of the best resources for genealogists, and it's free. It's created by Brigham Young University, which has a renowned genealogy program, and they've created tutorials for various languages. So this is the Spanish language tutorial. Look at all the great resources in the column on the left. There's abbreviations, list of surnames, list of given names. I thought I was pretty familiar with most names in the Spanish language, but going through these records, I've discovered I'm not. There's old-fashioned names that you don't see used anymore. So these lists have really helped me figure out names and records. So, and I'm just like, what is this? I don't recognize this. They have samples of handwriting from different eras, alphabet charts, samples of records and their time periods and exercises, all kinds of wonderful things. So if you haven't already tried it, whether for Spanish or another language, go ahead and give it a try. It's a really great resource. So here's just a couple of sample abbreviations. So let's look at the ones on the left. We've got MA. You want to guess in your head what that stands for? Maria. Okay, we're getting a little harder. J-U-O. Juan. I've also seen Juan abbreviated J-U with a little N. But then also, why do you need to abbreviate Juan? It's already a short name. Okay, this last one is a little bit harder. X-P-T-U-O-A-L. Cristobal, the X standing for Christ or for Christ. And then the two examples, I've got one on top, Estanislao Avalos, and then BTRO. It's actually a surname that was very common in the community, Buen Rostro, and whoever the record keeper was decided to abbreviate it. Okay, the example on the bottom, we've got a list of padrinos, and on the bottom line, you see YD period, YD period. It's like quotation marks today. It's short for the Latin word idem. It's YD is idem, YD-EM, and it just means the same. So Rafaelo Maciel is just repeated on the next line. Okay, I've shown you a lot of records, and by now you might be wondering, how do I find these records? Well, the good news is a lot of them are available online. Family Search and Ancestry are the two biggest genealogy websites, and you can find church records, civil registration records, church censuses, and the 1930 federal census on them. Now, there are some tricks, though, to using them beyond the search boxes. Let's start with Family Search. It's a free website. You create an account, and then you can view records. One way to use the website is to enter names in the search boxes. And they recently just changed their layout, which is so aggravating, isn't it, when websites change their layout? But you enter names in the search boxes, you get your search results, and you look at them, and you decide if they match up with what you know about your ancestor. So that's kind of like getting your low-hanging fruit. But what about some of the fruit at the top of the tree? Well, that's getting into the unindexed records on Family Search. So Family Search is the creation of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and they send missionaries around the world to microfilm or digitize vital records. And there's such a great quantity that they're not all indexed, meaning you're not going to find these records when you type a name into a search box. Instead, you can find them by going into Family Search's catalog, and then you can browse the images like you would a book. So here's the FamilySearch.org catalog. Many different ways to search for things. One that I use a lot, maybe I overuse it, is I use the place search. So you can enter a town name or state or country. You can combine it with keyword if you'd like. Hit search. So I did a search for Cahumatlan, and now it's showing me the records that they have for Cahumatlan. And this is actually just a portion of them that I could show within one screen. You can see they're labeled, right? We've got baptisms, 1823 to 1857. And then on the far right are these icons. If you see a camera, that means the images on that roll of microfilm have been digitized, and you can view them online. The icon that's a magnifying glass, that icon means that at least some of those records have been indexed. Not necessarily all of the records, but some. So if you click on the camera at the unindexed records, you'll get something like this. It's showing you all the images from that roll of microfilm. And you can see there's 606 images. When you first try this out, it seems a little overwhelming, but you quickly figure out there's usually some sort of structure to the records. Perhaps organized chronologically, or there's an index. So what you can do is just click around on these different images. You know, this is baptisms from X year to X year, and if you know the baptism you're looking for is towards the end of that time period, you can kind of jump towards the end images. Okay, a cool trick to using Ancestry beyond the search boxes is to use a catalog and get into the specific collection of the record you're looking for. So if you're looking for a civil registration birth record from Michoacan, don't use the search boxes on the homepage. You know, you don't need to see everything else that Ancestry has. So what you can do is go into the catalog and enter your parameters. You'll see a lot of different selections you can make on the left-hand side. So I chose Mexico. Then I filtered it down some more to Michoacan. And here at the top, or I think it's the second one, Michoacan civil registration births. So now I can go directly into that one collection and search within it. What's really great about Ancestry is if you scroll down the page, you'll see a description of that collection. And I've included an image there on the right, and it gives you more information about this collection and what you can expect from it. Okay, you might have noticed that many of the records on Ancestry and Family Search are from decades ago. If you're looking for more recent records that are not available online, you might have to contact the institution that created them to request a copy. For example, for a Mexican birth certificate, you can use this government website. Or if you're traveling to Mexico, you can visit the Civil Registration Office. Okay, as we wrap this up, remember research strategies. We're going to compare multiple records. We're going to remember standard formats. We're going to keep an eye out for descriptive words following names. We're going to identify a place of origin by looking at records created in the United States. And then we're going to research them. We're going to look them up in the Garcia Cubas's Geographical Dictionary. We'll look for church records and civil registration records, and we will get through these documents by remembering most are written in very standard formats, and we can use tools like the BYU script tutorial for words we're not familiar with. And lastly, we'll improve our online research by using the catalogs of Ancestry and Family Search. And with that, we'll be well on our way to researching Mexican ancestry. Thank you for joining me. And I want to do a quick shout out for a program we're having next Friday, but I hope it doesn't conflict with anything Sue's offering next Friday. But we are having a free program called Your 19th and 20th Century Mexican Ancestors in the United States. It's a webinar with Colleen Robledo Green at 2 p.m. Central Time, and you can register at, on the library's website, houstonlibrary.org, or I have the direct link here on the website, on the slide image, sorry.
Joy, do you record your presentations for the library and then put them on your like a YouTube channel or something?
If the speaker gives us permission, yeah, we'll do that. And it does take at least a month or two for them to show up on our YouTube channel, though.
Wonderful. Could you show everybody how to get to your YouTube channel?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. How do I get out of this?
You may want to try stop sharing and then go to, yeah, or open up a new tab. That might work too.
Actually, I've got this Zoom menu covering the address bar. Oh, there we go. Oops. Oh boy.
That worked.
Okay. HoustonLibrary.org. Oh, what did I just do? I didn't do that right. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, here we are at YouTube. And then I usually put in Houston Public Library. There it is. And then you got to go to playlists. We are a little bit hard to find the genealogy program. So you go to playlists, and there's one called History Research Centers. We have 3 special collection libraries, of which we're one. And so we're on that playlist there. So we've got, here's some different Clayton Library programs. I wonder if I make it bigger, if you can see the topics.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So yeah, you might want to check some of those out.
Well, let's see here. I had a couple questions. You answered some of the questions as you went on. Like I was curious about the M and the little a. You went into that about how that is Maria, and that kind of makes sense. You on one of your slides, Joy, you said that there was under the confirmation slide. What is a sponsor?
So I was raised in the Catholic Church, but let's see what I can remember. So it's like you're somebody who would kind of guide or counsel you in your spiritual, like your sponsor, you know, help keep you participating in the church and following the doctrines.
Like a godparent?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And if anybody who's more well-spoken about the Catholic Church wants to add to that, you're welcome to.
Guide to a spiritual life.
Guide to spiritual life?
That's
like
good.
So like a godparent then in the Protestant faith. Okay. And then you showed the 1930 census. Now, censuses are notorious for missing parts of it. In Mexico, are there any, to your knowledge, missing parts of the 1930 census?
Sure. The federal district, so like the Mexico City area, and there might be a few other areas, but that's the only one I know for sure.
Yeah, I was wondering that because it's just not uncommon for that to happen.
Quite a bit of it's available. I mean, I haven't heard complaints from other researchers. I know Mexico City is missing.
Okay. Now, do you by any chance have a Pathfinder for anybody, who is interested in learning more about Mexican genealogy?
Well, there's a handout I emailed you,
Uh-huh.
has different links and tips, but that would be it.
Okay. So not on, like there's nothing on your website about it or anything like that?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. And then you listed a wonderful list of Hispanic periodicals. I'm going to run each one of those through EBSCOhost to see if they have them. By any chance, do you know if any of them are on EBSCOhost?
I do not know. I've tried looking for them in Percy, but I haven't found them in there yet. So it does make them a little bit harder to track down. We have quite a few at the Clayton Library. If you, yeah, I don't know. I don't have any other tips about getting them.
Okay. Are there any kind of indexes to them?
If they are, they're within the periodical itself. I know there are some who like publish an index at the end of the year. But again, I have not found them in Percy.
Okay, good to know. Okay. And then let's see here. I have a couple more questions. I wanted to let the class know you showed that wonderful book on census records for Latin America by Lyman de Platt. We do have that book in our library collection, so I just wanted to let the class know that in case they're interested in using it. And then you mentioned that there were many archives throughout Mexico, and by any chance, do you know, are they on Archive Grid?
I have not checked that out. I'm just aware of like some of the websites that I mentioned, like the Bear Archives. They have their own website. Nacogdoches Archives are on Ancestry, and so forth.
Okay, great. All right. Did anyone else have any other questions? Those were the questions I wrote down. I'll give everyone a few moments. Okay. All right. Then I'll just let everyone know before you start to sign off, if there's anything in the chat box that you would like to download before you leave class today, please don't forget to download it. You can download it by just clicking on those three little dots and downloading it, or you can just copy and paste the entire chat box and email it to yourself if you'd like. And once again, Joy, I wanted to say thank you very much for a wonderful and very informative webinar. And it will take our marketing department several weeks as well to get it up on YouTube, but I will send you the link as soon as it is available. And then I wanted to let the class know we will continue to go on with class for about another hour, hour and a half. So if you'd like to stay and work on your family trees, please feel free to stay. And if not, you can go ahead and log out right now by clicking on the red in button, and that'll take you out. So with that, Joy, I will say thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed the presentation today. And if the students have any questions, they can email you directly, correct?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I'm sure I rambled at some points in the presentation. So if you think of any questions later or you'd like me to clear something up, my email is joy.oria@houstontx.gov, and I'll be happy to help you out.